What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Stokastic channel. And today we're talking some XFL DFS. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We are brought to you by Prize Picks today, and they have a phenomenal deal where you can get one free month of Stokastic Plus Platinum and a $100 match deposit bonus when you sign up and make your first deposit with Prize Picks. All you have to do is click the link in the video description below. This is a daily prop-based site. There's no sharks, no optimizers, no mass entries. You're making lineups of up to 5 players where you can 10x your entry fee, and you can use your knowledge across sports. So if you are playing NBA on Prize Picks, you don't necessarily need to make a lineup of just NBA players. You can mix and match with NHL. MLB is back. They have a ton of different sports, so make sure to check them out. All right. We're going into week 8 of the XFL. So been a little bit weird. Last week was not a good week for me because things change every single week, no matter what. So with that said, I think first thing we should talk about is we're recording this on Thursday. Keep up with the injury reports. Keep up with the signings teams make. A lot of times the roster that comes into this video on Thursday is not the roster that these teams actually field on the weekend. For reference, Brandon Silvers didn't play last week. We made a whole video assuming he was going to be in. So make sure you keep up to date. I will do my best to talk about the injuries that are listed currently. Let's bring you over to DraftKings. 4-game slate as usual. We are going to go game by game and team by team within that. So we'll kick things off with Vegas, the Vipers, right away. This is a team that struggled this year quite a bit, actually. As far as pass rate, about 60% of the time, they're running 56.5 plays per game. That's 6th and 5th in the XFL, 2-5 record. They're easily one of the worst teams. They've already been eliminated from playoff contention. No, I guess, chance of moving anything forward here. No quarterback continuity. Been one of the toughest teams to evaluate overall. This week, we'll pull up their spread here as I produce the own show. Got 18 tabs going. They're 7-point underdog. Makes a lot of sense. Total's 46. That gives them the second lowest implied team total on the board. As we've seen in a couple weeks now, they traded away Luis Perez. That means they were left with Brett Hundley and Jalen McClendon last week. McClendon played almost all the snaps. He actually played okay. Completed 21 to 31 passes. And that went for 264 yards and a pair of scores. Also rushed the ball 8 times for 25 yards. But apparently they're not happy with Brett Hundley because they signed a random dude off the street named D'Angelo Fulford. And I've never heard of him. And I cover college football. I'm actually going to look up where he went right now. But I don't think there's much to really think about here other than, all right, maybe they're going to cut this guy, Brett Hundley. Regardless, looks like he went to Mountain Union. Okay, so he's not even playing at the FBS level. That's D'Angelo Fulford. Regardless, he's not in the player pool. I think McClendon gets another start here after he played decently well in the opening game. I don't think he has a lock on getting every single snap here, so it's tough to trust him. He does run, so GPPs, I think you could use him. The backfield's one of the nastiest in the league. It's a straight 3-way committee. Rod Smith and Lovett are ahead of Burt, but I mean, it's not really anything we want to write home about. As you can see, their fantasy points per game are really low. These guys have nothing really separating them in terms of the run game. They've kind of flip-flopped in terms of who's received most of the work here too. Last week, if you want to know, 42% of the touches went to Rod Smith and 38% went to Lovett, not playing either. In the past game, the biggest thing here is Jeff Badet, who's been usable, got injured last week, and he has not practiced over the first 2 days of this week. That basically just has left Geronimo Allison as a locked-in starter here. And I think that remains the case. He's probably the number 1 wide receiver moving forward here. With that said, they benched Martavis Bryant, straight up benching, and they used Sink Sweeting and Matthew Sexton as their 2 and their 3. This could remain the case again this week. I have no idea. Last week, Sink Sweeting, 71% of routes. Matthew Sexton, 77%. Martavis Bryant, 34%. Yeah, this is a difficult situation to evaluate. Geronimo is by far the safest if you want to take a shot on this terrible offense. You can. They also signed Saeed Blacknall, who didn't play last week. He should make his debut here. I know it says out. That's not the case. He just wasn't ready. I mean, they haven't updated these for week 8, but he was just not ready to play last week, hadn't been with the team long enough. He will be this week. And then Travis Kuntz also returned to limited practice twice to open this week. He should be back to muddy that tight end room even more than it is. So you can tell I'm not really too interested. Maybe a contrarian McClendon or a contrarian Allison here. I don't really foresee Badet playing in this game. Second team, we've got St. Louis with a pretty good team total here. St. Louis, the team I think we do want to be looking at. I believe they have the second highest implied team total on the slate. Just kidding. It is number 1. They have the highest implied team total here, which says a lot, actually. Looking at the projections, McCarron has the highest quarterback projection this week, which is by a narrow margin, but still, we haven't seen this really. McCarron does not run, but his passing volume has been pretty good this year. And this is a team that passes over 60% of the time. That's third in the XFL. They run 54 plays per game, which is 6, but they're drawing a cupcake matchup here. They just demolished the Vipers and they beat the Roughnecks last week, which is solid. As far as quarterback play for McCarron, he's been about middle of the pack to above average, 6.6 yards per attempt, about a 66 completion percentage. Doesn't run, but as you can see, he still averages 22.4 fantasy points per game. He's been solid, rock solid here. Makes sense. He is number 1 in terms of raw projection. So that's a pretty cut and dry projection here for him. Brian Hill also pretty cut and dry. He actually projects slightly ahead of Abram Smith this week. Might be surprising, but this is basically team total derived. It's one of the few times we've seen DC as an underdog. So when looking at this team here, Brian Hill has moved pretty clearly ahead of Mateo Durant and Kareem Walker. Not actually very close anymore either. Brian Hill handled 78% of the touches last week. Very involved in the pass game too, which we don't see a lot of running backs. A lot of teams don't even use their running back in the pass game. But as far as routes run for him, last week he was at 57.5%. Brian Hill is an excellent workload and he's worth the spend. Among the receivers, we have basically Hakeem Butler and Darius Shepard operating as the 1-2. Not too much separates them. Hakeem Butler, slightly better target rate. And that's kind of reflected in pricing. And there's fantasy points per game here too, but both of them above 95% of the routes. That makes a lot of sense to me. Austin Prell, he saw his routes drop from 82% to 70%. That was with the return of Marcel Aitman. Another thing that I did not expect when we recorded the video last week. He'd missed 3 games in a row, but he returned to a 55% route share. I would expect this to be Hakeem Butler and Shepard as the 1-2 with some sort of combination of Prell and Aitman as the 3-4. I don't know if Aitman gets more snaps here or if they're comfortable with Prell. It's tough to say, really. Neither has been particularly good on the field, just for what it's worth. But I think this cancels out all the other guys, like Steven Mitchell. We don't want any part of him. Gary Jennings. George Campbell's played some snaps here and there. I think they're all kind of erased at this point, and that's what we're looking at for the top 4. I would rank them Butler 1, Shepard 2, tentatively Prell 3, Aitman 4. So basically right in order of pricing here. Going to our second game, it's Arlington taking on Orlando. Arlington, we'll get up the spread. They should be underdogs here, and they are. 1.5 point spread in favor of Orlando, 42.5 point total. This is the team that traded for Luis Perez. They've had complete quarterback meltdown this year. Started with Drew Plitt, benched him for Kyle Sloter. People thought that would be an upgrade. I just like to victory lap Kyle Sloter because he's so bad and so many people thought he was decent. Anyway, they cut him because of how bad he truly was. Moved back to Drew Plitt. That did not go well last week, so they now have signed Luis Perez, who was not ready to play last week, predictably, but he now is projected as the starter tentatively with another week under his belt. They also signed Kelly Bryant off the street. You may remember him from his days at Clemson and Missouri. Somewhat mobile, but on the depth chart, they still listed Kevin Anderson ahead of him. Perez has actually been decent as a passer this year. 7.4 yards per attempt, about a 66 completion percentage, but he doesn't run at all. He, I think, is the single worst rushing QB in this entire league. So you're still playing on an awful team who, frankly, is lucky to be 3-4. And then you're talking about a downgrade in overall offense. I don't know. It's very tough for me to click Luis Perez, especially not knowing what he's going to give you in the new offense. The carry split for the backfield was a little closer to 50-50 than I expected, but De'Veon Smith still produced a little bit better because of some, touchdown variance, more efficient. So I think you are running the risk here of De'Veon Smith maybe being a guy that takes on more work because he actually played pretty well last week. Semi-involved in the pass game as well here. Just this carry split, 62.5% Smith, 37.5% Letty Brown. As far as the routes and how those broke down, it was De'Veon Smith at 42%, and then we had Letty Brown at 36. So it's pretty close. It's just not reflected in the box score. Makes me a little wary of Smith here, especially against Orlando, who's now the favorite in this game. At receiver, tight end, my best advice is to play nobody or just Sal Cannella. I'll read you the route rates. Some of you will be curious. Cannella had basically been a 90% route guy all year. Last week dropped to 70. Tyler Vaughn's 39%. Brandon Arconato 33. Luan Winningham 50. Caleb Van Der Esch 44. Javante Payton 39. Victor Bolden 44. Tight end Nate Becker 19. Rennell Hall 42. And that's it. As you can see, nobody above 50% except for Sal Cannella. I don't know if that changes. There's really no way to predict it. This team lists starters every single week, and then they play just every single guy on the roster, 50% of the snaps except Cannella. Complete stay away. On the Orlando side, we've now seen Quinton Dormady basically show out as the team's starting quarterback, and he's been awesome. Playing every single snap, they seem to have fully committed to him. His passing numbers have been solid. 7.9 yards per attempt, 69% completion percentage. He doesn't have the same volume overall in the season because he's only started a couple games now. So the sample's small, but if you were to just overlay him against the rest of the quarterbacks, he has the single best passing statistics in this league, which is solid. I mean, now we're just hoping that it continues over a larger sample. And luckily they get Arlington this week. So that should be pretty solid here. But this is a team we've been trying to buy low on. They're 1-6, but again, they lost to the Vipers by 3. They lost to the Renegades by 1. They lost to Seattle 26-19, and they just beat DC. Much better team than the record indicates. So I think Dormady's live, and he showed a little bit of rushing equity last week. 6 attempts, pretty good for him. He's never going to be a guy that's Jordan Tiamu on the ground, but Dormady offering a little bit of rushing chops is going to be solid for his projection. He's still too cheap, especially seeing Orlando taking money against this awful Arlington team. The backfield is really difficult to decipher. It's essentially 50-50 straight down the middle with basically John Martin and Devin Darrington flipping roles every single week. Last week, you had about a 60-40 split John Martin's way, and then this last week, Devin Darrington about a 55-45 split his way. Neither back is involved in the pass game. Darrington has been more efficient, so I think you are running the risk of Darrington maybe taking out a little more, but it's basically now a 3-week stretch, 3 weeks in a row, where we've seen this be essentially 50-50 committee. I think shots on the cheaper Darrington could make some sense just to save some salary, but he's not going to be anybody near the top of our projections. Receiver, this spot I think is getting a little more ironed out for Orlando. It basically is Cody Latimer. I wish he would run more routes, but he's targeted so often, I don't think it makes a difference. Last week, 59% of the routes. Just not what you want for a guy. But he's targeted so often, I think you can still play Latimer. If you don't want to and you want to play somebody else, Charleston Rambo and Eli Rogers, both full-time players here. Neither have been great, especially Eli Rogers, man. Like, what a disappointment. Averaging 5.8 fantasy points per game in the XFL after you actually were productive in the NFL. We're seeing that with a lot of these washed NFL guys. Like, they're just not as good as the young players that can't quite cut it in the NFL, which is weird to say. I thought it would be the opposite, but like Eli Rogers has been clearly behind Rambo, who's never been in the NFL. You're seeing Martavis Bryant and Josh Gordon get benched. I don't know. They just have not been very good. The other player who's seeing a lot of time on the field and splitting time with Latimer has been Dan Williams. Dan Williams is a 64 and a 100% route share over the last 2 weeks. He's firmly in play at 3.8K. He should probably play ahead of Rogers. Honestly, at this point, he's been more efficient, but we just haven't seen it yet. So Dan Williams would be that flyer fourth option I'd look at behind Latimer, Rambo, and Eli Rogers. Going to our next game, we have Houston taking on San Antonio. This is a game I'll be looking at Houston here. They're 5-point favorites. The total is 40 points. Brandon Silver's still listed with the out tag, but he's returned to practice, which is positive for this team. I don't know how much it matters overall. Cole McDonald absolutely imploded last week. He's been basically a run-first quarterback. They have comparable passing stats, 6.5 yards per attempt for Silver, 6.6 for McDonald. The real difference is in the completions, 62% for Silver's, 54% for McDonald. Does that offset McDonald's rushing equity? I'm not sure. Silver's is a statue. McDonald actually is a really good runner. We saw that all the way back at his time with Hawaii. So I don't know who's better for the offense, but all I know is it's probably Silver's that's going to get the start if he can continue to get in limited practices this week. Overall, they could split time as well here, which makes me a little nervous, but Silvers would go back to being GPP viable just because this team, they're pass heavy. They're second in pass rate. They run about 57 plays per game. That's fourth. Their losses are to Seattle, DC, and St. Louis. Those are really good teams to lose to. So I think they do hold an edge over San Antonio, who we'll get to in a little bit here. The backfield, this is why I lost a lot of money last week, was I was overweight on Max Borghi compared to the Abram Smiths, the Brian Hills of the world, which was a mistake. And I don't know if it was predictable, but regardless, it was an L I have to take. Borghi the week prior handled 80% of the carries. The next week, the week I played a lot of them, it dropped to 50%. You saw Bryson Aline jump from 13% to 39%. We saw DeJuan Lee jump from 6% to 11%. Borghi just his role fell off the face of the earth, which I mean, I never would have played him assuming he was only going to see 50% of the carries, but this is the volatility in the XFL. You think one thing is going to happen, then boom, instantly, his carries are essentially cut in half. And he needs the carries. This is a pass-heavy offense, but they don't involve the running back in the pass game, which is crazy to say because Borghi was an awesome pass catcher in his time with Washington State. We've kind of beat that point home at this point. But you look at Borghi, he was around 15% of the routes last week. Bryson Aline, 18%. DeJuan Lee, I believe he ran one route. They just do not use these players in the pass game. Borghi's season high in routes in any individual game is 36%. They would much rather have these guys pass block or just get them off the field in favor of another receiver than use them in the pass game. So it's hard to click Borghi's name at this price. Wish I would have learned this lesson ahead of last week's game, but alas, we move forward and try to make better decisions the next time out. Receiver, it's pretty cut and dry here. You have Deontay Burnett and Cedric Byrd running around in every single drop back. Same with Travell Harris and Justin Smith. Justin Smith, Travell Harris, and Deontay Burnett, all three were at 100% of the routes last week. Cedric Byrd was the guy at 92%. They did add Michael Bandy off the street for a 29% route rate last week. I don't know if that rises. I can't see it really getting too much higher. Ben Putnam has been banged up, so maybe you see him get close to 40, but I don't really know if he's going to eclipse any of these other guys. It's basically priced pretty efficiently here. The one guy I do prefer over the rest is Cedric Byrd. His targets per route run have been awesome this year. His targets overall have also been really good. He just started the year injured, so you're seeing him come on slow. If you look at the first 3 games, 2 targets, 3 targets, 3 targets. Here's his last 4, 7, 9, 8, 9. He leads the team in targets over that span, and he's well ahead of Deontay Burnett, who leads the team overall. So this is one where I don't quite agree with pricing. I think overall, I'm going to say Byrd is the number one for me, followed by Burnett, Travell Harris, Justin Smith, and then Bandy coming up last here. San Antonio, this team has really had some quarterback problems this year, and this team projects for the lowest implied team total on the board, so you want to be careful here. Again, they're 5-point underdogs. The total in the game is 40. This team has been horrible scoring, and they unfortunately just lost Kurt Benkert. So they start the year with Cone, gets hurt. Reed Sinnett plays briefly, gets hurt. Kurt Benkert, sign him off the street. He gets hurt immediately, 3 broken ribs. Juwan Pass has to fill in, plays terribly. They're back to Cone, who's returned to practice. He's expected to play here. If something happens, there's a setback, they'll just go right back to Pass, and this team will probably lose by 25 points. With Cone under center, you have a subpar quarterback for the XFL, which is saying a lot and tells you how bad he truly is. 50, let's see here. Sorry, that was Bankert's stats here. Cone has a 5.0 yards per attempt and a 57% completion percentage. That's awful. He also doesn't run a ton, which means this is a guy that probably is looking on the outside in for DFS lineups, even if he does get the starting job. The other thing that they did is they signed Paxton Lynch, who's not even listed on this team yet. I believe he's still on Orlando's roster. Yeah, there he is. But he's not with them anymore. He's on San Antonio. They claimed him. I don't think this is much of an upgrade at all. And he also is just getting to the team. I don't even know if he'll be ready to play here. All this to say, you're probably not playing a San Antonio quarterback, regardless of who it is. The backfield, this still kind of is Jock Patrick's job. There's not really too much to say otherwise. It's just the team is so inefficient. You're not getting much value with him. I played a lot of him last week too. Now he went from 82% of the carries to 67%. Not ideal, but he still is seeing a lot of work in the pass game. So he has a decent floor that's better than some backs. But at the same time, it's like, do I want to target Jock Patrick and his 62% route rate, or would I rather just go to like an Abram Smith, a Brian Hill? And I think I would rather make those decisions than play Jock Patrick, but I think you could do worse. He's in play, I do believe, at 6,800. Hilliman saw a roll increase, but I don't believe this is something to bank on this week. Kevin Marks still has not seen the field. At receiver, whoops, accidentally alphabetically sorted, not by salary. All right, we're back now at receiver with this Brahmas team. Basically, we have Fred Brown, we have TJ Vasher, and we have Landon Akers as our top three. I don't think much changes here. I think Vasher's still your number one. He's not priced like it, but his routes are way up there, 96%, 98%. Fred Brown, I think, is your 2, 96%, 76% of routes. And then Landon Akers has been at 83 2 weeks in a row. Jalen Tolliver has not been playing. He did start off injured, but he came back last week for a brief period of time. I do believe, I'll check my notes on that. Maybe he missed last week. Yeah. This is a guy, he went on injured reserve. Excuse me. So actually, they placed him on injured reserve and signed Nick Holley. This Q for Tolliver should be an out or an IR, whatever they do here. They also moved Calvin Turner back to injured reserve. Oh, well, with Tolliver, he hasn't really played in weeks anyway, so I don't think it changes anything with Vasher, Akers, or Fred Brown. Travis Tavinen cleaned up the rest of their routes with 24%. You have tight end Alizé Mack and Deion Yelder splitting. Mack was at 53% of the routes. Yelder was at 31%. Travis Johnson didn't play last week, even though he wasn't on the final injury report. So I don't think Nick Holley comes in and plays much. He's awful. We've seen him with another team this year. I think their three receiver sets are pretty solid, I think. Solid isn't locked in. But how much you want to target these guys with an awful quarterback and the lowest implied team total, I think, is not much. Final game, we have DC taking on Seattle. Seattle's taking some money here, which I don't agree with, but we'll talk about it nonetheless. A bit surprising to me. Seattle, 1.5 point favorites, 46.5 total overall. Means we should be targeting both these teams for DFS still. Team basically isn't using De'Aaron King anymore, so Jordan Ta'amu, I think, is an excellent play. He started off the year with just horrible efficiency numbers, and he's gotten better. Yards per attempt has jumped to 7.3, 61% completion, 52 carries, best of any signal caller in this league. Ta'amu, completely fine price-adjusted play. Backfield's pretty cut and dry here, too. It's been a 60-30 split between Abram Smith and Raekwon Armstead. Nothing really to say here. The same thing goes for pass game. Armstead is a potential buy low. He's still getting like 8 carries per game, but all the upside coming through Abram Smith. I think he's a completely fine play. Receiver, they did sign Raymond Calais recently. They signed Puka Williams this upcoming week. I don't know why. The receiver room's been consistent with Lucky Jackson, 84% of the routes, Josh Hammond, 78%, and Chris Blair, 81%. I think all three are completely fine here. Jaquez Ezzard is going to be back this week. He was listed as a starter on the depth chart. Even before he was injured, he was at about 10% of the routes. So I'm not reading too much into that. I still think it's Lucky, Jackson, Hammond, and Blair. Tight end Briley Moore has actually become more involved too. He had a 69% route rate last week, but they also only had him and Alex Ellis active I think we see Ethan Wolf return this week. If we do, it's probably more around 50% for Bradley Moore. But man, he's a pretty good GPP play at 2.9K, now up to 69% of the routes if the injuries shake his way. This is a spot where we definitely want to be targeting pass catchers just because the upside of the offense so good. I think this is probably the shootout of the week in terms of the XFL. Last team, Seattle, Ben DiNucci, one of the best quarterbacks. I think he's probably top 3 right now if you were to do an MVP running for the league. This team has a massive pass rate, 64% of the time. That's first. They're also tied for second in plays per game. They're 5-2, beat up on Arlington last week. DiNucci, 6.8 yards per attempt, 64% completion, completely fine. 38 carries. He's kind of second to only Jordan Tiamu in that category. Not an electric runner by any means, but they do run him more than most teams are running their signal callers. So DiNucci, I think he's right up there. We'll talk about top quarterbacks at really every position at the end of the show. But DiNucci deserves consideration. It's a good team total on Seattle. Here's the favorite. The backfield. This is a spot where I think we should be taking some shots on Philip Lindsay. So they lost Brendan Knox at the beginning of the year. They just lost Morgan Ellison. Darius Bradwell's been so bad that they've been using receiver running back hybrid TJ Hammonds to carry the ball. He's been terrible doing so because his true position's receiver. So they kind of hit the luck of the draw and signed a former Pro Bowler and Philip Lindsay off the street. I think he immediately is probably the best runner on this roster. Like, he's most recently been in the NFL. Is he Josh Gordon? Is he Martavis Bryant? Or is he a little bit better? I tend to side with his NFL pedigree, but I mean, he could be just as washed as those guys. With that said, he's not expensive. And you'd assume the passing game role is probably pretty good for him. So I like Philip Lindsay. There's just nobody else to carry the ball on this team. Bradwell and Hammonds have been awful doing so. So even though it's been a short period of time with that team, I think he gets every shot at the job, and they're favored. The receiving game, pretty cut and dry here. We've alluded to the Josh Gordon benching multiple times, and we're going to talk about it now. His route rate has gone from 71% in week 1 all the way down to 42% in week 5, back up to 55% in week 6, down to 34%, season low 34% in week 7 for Josh Gordon. Yep, you can't play him at this price. Or if you do, you hope the ownership's not there. I will not be playing him at this price. Ja'Cory Pearson, 98% of the routes. Blake Jackson, 98% of the routes. Both are better plays. You have Jordan Veazey, went from 75 to 56% of the routes. Juwan Green, 80% to 73%. Damian Willis, 45 to 63% of the routes. You kind of have a 5 here. I think that's probably where I'm going to cut it off. To rank them, it's Pearson, 1 by far. Blake Jackson, 2. I'm going to go Juwan Green, 3, just because the routes have been more consistent 2 weeks in a row. Jordan Veazey is going to be my 4, and Damian Willis is going to be my 5. There's not much separating the last 3, I will admit that. Josh Gordon is going to be my 6. I just am not playing him at this price tag, given the routes run for him. They're just absolutely awful. And yeah, that is the slate. I don't think I missed anybody, but leave a comment. Let me know if I did. Before we head out, we're going to run down just the top 3 or 4 at each position based on the projections as I pull it up. These have been updated this morning, but we will continue to update throughout the week as we get more information about who's in and who's out. All right, we got this up now. Quarterback, top 3, just raw projected. We have Ben DiNucci, AJ McCarron, and Quinton Dormady. Very little separates McCarron and DiNucci as the 1-2. It's actually 0.2 points. AJ McCarron has the slight edge, and I think that is largely team total driven. They are just projected for more points. Should be an easier matchup for St. Louis versus Ben DiNucci in Seattle. But I think you could play either one. They're very close in price. Obviously, value is going to side with McCarron if we have him slightly above DiNucci. Dormady is 3. He is volatile because the sample size is really small, but I think he's pretty clearly 3. And I think he is the best value, assuming his efficiency persists. And the rushing has actually been a little better than people think. Then there's a tie for 4 and 5. It's Brandon Silvers and Tiamu. I think these 2 players are similar, price adjusted. You saw a big spike on Jordan Tiamu. That's why he's not popping as much as he did last week. He's essentially up almost 2K in terms of price tag, but the rushing equity is there for Tiamu. I think he's still fine, even with the price hike. And Silvers, he needs to play, first of all, but if he does, we've seen the upside in that offense. I'm a little worried with him in splitting time, but I think he's still fine. Running back, there's not too much changing at the top here. Brian Hill and Abram Smith lead the position. Brian Hill plays for that really highly implied St. Louis team. Abram Smith just on the run heaviest team in the league. He should have the best overall role. Both of them have good pass game roles. And then at 3 and 4, it's kind of a tie between Jock Patrick and De'Veon Smith. They're very close to Philip Lindsay, who's just a tick below them. I think there's enough upside with Philip Lindsay, given his price tag, to just maybe give a bump to compared to these other guys. I think third, I would rank Patrick, fourth, Lindsay. And then from there, you're kind of getting into other players that maybe you want to take shots on, your Devin Darringtons, your Max Borges, players of that nature. Tight end will lump in with receiver. I don't think you really want to be playing tight ends out of Latimer and Canella. Those are the two I would look to if you're playing them. At receiver, though, not much has changed here either. Our top two have basically been Hakeem Butler and Ja'Cory Pearson to some degree over the last couple weeks. But I do think Cedric Byrd is worth mentioning here. I do think he should be played over Deontay Burnett. So we'd like to give you a value piece here too. Byrd has been targeted way more often recently since he took on a full-time role. He'll be the guy I look to save some value. But if you want to go up and be contrarian with Houston, Trevor Harris, and Burnett still in play, just think Cedric Byrd deserves to be a top 3 receiver on this slate with Pearson and Butler. All right, that'll do it for us. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Reach out on Twitter if you'd like. I'm at Matt_Gajewski. We'll be back finishing out the season, and we'll be talking USFL as well. So make sure to check that out. And until then, good luck.